Welcome to Asia Outlook. I'm Melody and I'm here to report the top stories from around Asia. India has banned the production and import of electronic cigarettes, a move that's likely to be a major hit to the global industry. The country's finance minister said e-cigarettes were becoming an increasing health risk as they were being used as a style statement. An executive order will be passed later. More than 900,000 people died each year in the country due to tobacco-related illnesses. India is reported to have more than 1 million adult smokers, second only to China in the world. Singapore's air quality has fallen to what the government calls unhealthy levels for the first time in 3 years. The National Environment Agency says wind is blowing the smog from Sumatra and Indonesia towards Singapore. Malaysia is also concerned about worsening air pollution. It has closed hundreds of schools and sent 500,000 face masks to residents in polluted areas. The smog is mainly caused by the smoke from fires made in Indonesia to clear land for palm oil and pulp and paper plantations. Taliban suicide bombers killed at least 48 people and wounded dozens more in 2 blasts on Tuesday, one at a campaign rally for the president in Paran and the other one in central Kabul. South Korean President Moon Jae-in says he's willing to do all he can to support denuclearization talks between the DPRK and the U.S. During a meeting with presidential aides, Moon said the working-level talks between Pyongyang and Washington will resume soon. Moon plans to hold a meeting with the United States President later this month on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And Reuters reports that DPRK leader Kim Jong-un invited President Donald Trump to visit Pyongyang in a letter sent in the 3rd week of August.
During a meeting with presidential aides, Moon said the working-level talks between Pyongyang and Washington will resume soon. Moon plans to hold a meeting with the U.S. president later this month on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And Reuters reports that the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un invited President Trump to visit Pyongyang in a letter sent in the 3rd week of August.
The China Festival being held in Moscow is celebrating 70 years of diplomatic relations between China and Russia. During the 2-day celebration, visitors are able to immerse themselves in Chinese culture. New figures have revealed 1 in 3 motorbike riders in Thailand has no license, and that's in a country with the world's highest percentage of bike deaths. Most at risk are young people. Now, instruction courses for high school students are being launched. CGTN's correspondent Martin Lowe reports.
High speed, complacency and a lack of law enforcement have all been blamed for Thailand's appalling motorbike carnage. But now there's another reason. Figures have revealed 1 in 3 bike riders doesn't have a license. Thailand has 21 million registered motorbikes, but only just over 13 million riders have passed a test and hold licenses. This in a country with the highest percentage of bike deaths in the world. On average, 68 people are killed on Thai roads every day, almost 3/4 of them bike riders.
I'm concerned that children are being killed under the age of 15 when they have no rights to ride motorbikes. Half of the riders over 15 who have accidents don't have licenses. Most learn how to ride from family, friends or by themselves, so they lack the knowledge to ride safely.
Now the Thai government is providing motorcycle instruction at high schools. It's launched a $900,000 scheme to train young riders.
I think this is a good idea because it helps youngsters who don't have licenses to learn how to ride properly. But we need to focus on the quality of riding, not just the number of people having licenses.
The target is to bring 51,000 high school students up to a standard where they can pass a test and obtain a license. It's common here in Thailand to see children riding motorbikes to school, well below the legal age to hold a license. Also 3 or 4 youngsters on the same bike, rarely wearing helmets. It seems there's often a casual disregard for road safety. Instructors hope teaching riding skills can help more young people obtain a proper license, but more importantly, reduce the shocking toll of injury and death on the country's roads. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Bangkok.
This is Asia Outlook broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. You can visit our website at miradio.com.mm. You can also listen to our programs live on the website. If you're on FM, make sure you catch us on 96.1 FM in Yangon, 96.5 in Mandalay, and 96.7 in Naypyidaw. You can also download MI Radio app on both iOS and Android devices for your own convenience. Beijing has just unveiled its official mascot for the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. Not surprisingly, one of China's most recognizable ambassadors, the panda, is one of them. The Paralympics will be represented by an orange Chinese lantern child. The unveiling was the culmination of weeks of design work, where millions of school children across the country took part in a special project called Beijing 2022, Mascots in My Eyes. They were revealed by Thomas Bach, president of the International Olympic Committee, along with other guests. Here is some of what Bach had to say.
Today is an important step on a milestone in Beijing's journey to make history as the first ever in Olympic history to host both summer and winter editions of the Olympic Games.
Meanwhile, Indonesia is taking more decisive action with a different environmental problem. Custom officials say they're sending hundreds of containers of waste back to some Western nations, including Spain, Australia, the US, and the UK, after finding they were contaminated with used plastic and hazardous materials. More than half of the containers have been turned around already. The Indonesian government has stopped more than 2,000 containers in several ports since July. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday there were many options short of war with Iran after Saudi Arabia displayed remnants of drones and missiles, which it said were used in a crippling attack on its oil facility that was unquestionably sponsored by Tehran.
Saudi Arabia showed off what it said is the debris from the attack, including what it called an Iranian Delta Wing drone and Ya Ali cruise missiles.
This attack did not originate from Yemen, despite Iran's best efforts to make it appear so. Their collaboration with their proxy in the region to create this false narrative is clear. Secondly, the attack was launched from the north, and was unquestionably sponsored by Iran.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo flew to Saudi Arabia. He was even more direct, calling the attacks an act of war by Iran. President Donald Trump said the US would increase sanctions on Iran, promising details in the next 48 hours. And taking questions from reporters, he left open the option of military action, as some of his supporters are demanding.
Well, there are many options, as you know, Phil. There are many options, and there's the ultimate option, and there are options a lot less than that, and we'll see. We're in a very powerful position.
Yemeni Houthi rebels insist they carried out the weekend attacks that cut Saudi Arabia's oil production by 50%. They called it retaliation for the Saudi-led war in Yemen that's killed tens of thousands and pushed the country to the point of famine. Iran denies the attack and says the blame rests with the Saudi coalition.
We don't want a conflict in the region. Who started the conflict? Not the Yemenis. It was Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and America, certain European countries, and the Zionist regime, which started the war in this region.
The backdrop to this crisis is Iran increasing its enrichment of uranium, following the US decision to unilaterally withdraw from the international nuclear deal last year. Even last week, there were expectations that the leaders of the two countries could meet. That seems a distant prospect now. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
A commemorative envelope was issued in Beijing on Monday, celebrating the 69th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and India. Exchanges between the two started as early as the 1st century AD. The release also marks the upcoming 70th birthday of the People's Republic of China.
Wang Hua, representing the China Foundation for Peace and Development, and Aquino Vimal, the Indian Embassy's Deputy Chief of Missions, unveiled the envelope. The stamp on the envelope, named the Peace Angels, is jointly designed by Chinese artist Mao Daizong and Indian painter Shashudan K. Gupta. Graduating from the Art and Crafts Knowledge of Lucknow University in India, Gupta joining the Senior Scholar Research Project of the China Academy of Art in 2016. He drew the modern architecture and auspicious clouds on the canvas, and Professor Mao Daizong of Shandong University of Arts added with flying apsaras.
And I think the theme is very good. They have brought a mix of modernity with certain historic and cultural value. They have two apsaras painted on this image, which is from Dunhuang, if you recall. I mean, it has one of the places where Buddhism kind of spread in China. So I think it's a very good initiative to get an Indian artist to come here and do this event.
India was the first non-socialist country who tied diplomatic relations with China. Mr. Wang Hua says the initiation is very special and is going to be continued.
About 2-3 months ago, my workmates and I had a discussion and decided to celebrate the 70th birthday of the People's Republic of China in a rather traditional way. It's possibly the first time that we brought together renowned artists from both China and India to combine their inspirations and complete a piece of art. We hope to finish 70 of these commemorative envelopes by the end of this year.
Travel thousands of miles and remain true to our original aspiration. Before India, China has issued the commemorative envelopes with 8 countries, including Maldives, France, Russia, Cuba, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Colombia, and Ecuador.
Tensions continue to simmer between Tokyo and Seoul after South Korea removed Japan from a list of countries receiving fast-track trade approvals. It follows Tokyo's decision to downgrade Seoul's trade status last month.
Japan's measures have been inconsistent with the international trade system, making it difficult for us to cooperate with Japan. I would say that this fact has been taken into consideration when making this decision.
A number of South Korean exporters will now have to wait up to 15 days before they can ship goods to Japan, much longer than the previous 5-day wait. Tokyo calls the decision extremely regrettable. Last week, South Korea filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization over a separate Japanese move, which saw tighter export controls on key materials that South Korean companies use to manufacture semiconductors and displays.
The widespread use of electronic mail and the entry of huge e-commerce companies into parcel delivery has led to a sharp decline in the use of postal mail and stamps. But in Singapore, one group is reviving the stamp collection and letter writing in their own unique way. Miro Liu with this report.
With over 1,200 frames of rare and exquisite stamps from 26 countries and regions, the Asian International Stamp Exhibition is certainly one of the biggest events in the world of philately, or stamp collecting. However, the number of visitors at the event told a different story. Walking down rows of collector stamps at the Asian International Stamp Exhibition, I haven't seen many young faces. With the average age of a collector believed to be 60 years and above, stamp collection is undeniably a dying hobby in this digital age. 25-year-old Kay Tan is part of a new wave of stamp collectors who are looking to change that. She's an avid letter writer, postcard collector, and boasts an enviable collection of over 5,000 stamps.
When I started, I was about 7 or 8, so that was when some of my relatives, they actually moved overseas. So I was very close to them. So what happened was my mom got me in touch with the idea of writing letters with them.
Kay stopped writing letters or collecting stamps at the age of 13 because it was considered uncool. A few years later, she returned to her much-loved hobby and hasn't looked back ever since.
One day I was actually scrolling through Facebook, just reading for social media updates, and there was an advertisement that popped up. So it said Post Crossing, a platform that allows people to send a postcard to someone, and when that person receives it, then you will get another postcard from someone else. So that was how I actually started, and that was also the platform that I found a lot of Singaporeans, stamp collectors. I got into the idea of buying stamps, mostly for sending postcards, but I ended up collecting them as well. The people in the Singapore Post Crossing group, I would say we come from a very diverse background. So the youngest person that I know is actually about 15 years old, and that is actually my pen pal.
Ironically, Kay and her community of pen pals and philatelists are now using digital media to share their stories with each other across the globe.
Stamp collecting is actually evolving. For the younger generation, when they collect things that they are passionate or they can relate to them. One of the new ways of stamp collecting is people will collect them in notebooks. So everyone will actually send out their notebooks in a circle until you receive your own one back. Then you get to see the artwork that people have done, such as you just paste a certain theme of stamps on the pages. Another one is you can actually use stamps to create arts.
As more young people and women take up stamp collecting, this age-old hobby may regain some of its lost glory in the digital age. Miro Liu, CGTN, Singapore.
Israelis will head to the polls on Tuesday for the country's second general election in less than 6 months. What happened to force another election, and has anything changed since April? CGTN's Stephanie Fried addressed those questions in this rundown of the major candidates and issues voters face as they get ready to vote.
Israel's election redux has been long and contentious, characterized by accusations, racism, fear-mongering, and bold proclamations and promises. But has anything changed since the last round, when right-wing Likud party leader and current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu couldn't form a coalition?
Netanyahu's legal situation is different, so he's much more fragile than he was in April.
Netanyahu faces indictment for corruption soon after the vote, so his campaign has been colored by maneuvering for immunity. Tactics have included internationally criticized commitments to annex Palestinian territories and racist warnings against the country's 20% Arab voters. On par in the polls with Likud is the centrist Blue and White Party, headed by former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz. Blue and White was tied with Likud in the last election, numbers now aren't showing a change. The smaller joint list could play a historic role in influencing coalition building if Arab sector voters who generally stay away from the polls show up this time.
No one, Jewish or Arab, does anything for us. Arab politicians have no voice.
A key figure is Soviet-born former Netanyahu aide Avigdor Lieberman, leading the secular right Israel Home or Yisrael Beitenu party. His party made double election gains over last time, and he could play a decisive role in making or breaking another term for Benjamin Netanyahu. What are the voters saying?
I've always voted Likud, but I may change my position. Those of us on the front line are like ducks in a shooting gallery. We've got no vision of where the security situation is headed.
I'd like to vote for Jewish Home or Likud. My views and opinions are right-wing, but I haven't decided who to vote for yet.
In the lead-up to Tuesday's vote, many Israelis say they're undecided, an indication of the uncertainty that led to the current unprecedented round. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Jerusalem.
Dozens of schools have been closed across Malaysia as smoke filled haze blankets much of the country. Malaysia says it's caused by slash and burn land clearing in neighboring Indonesia, though Indonesia says Malaysia plantation companies and fires closer to home are at least partially to blame. Still, many others are seeing the occurrence of haze as a failure of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Ryan Meltzer reports from Kuala Lumpur.
Malaysia's administrative capital, Putrajaya, shrouded in haze, with air pollution reaching levels deemed very unhealthy. All schools in Putrajaya, as well as hundreds more in other parts of the country, have been closed. In areas with merely unhealthy air, all outdoor school activities have been cancelled. On the Indonesian island of Sumatra, hundreds of fires are burning, with winds blowing the smoke toward Malaysia and Singapore. First signed in 2002, the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution vowed to combat regional haze through concerted national efforts and international cooperation. Indonesia was the last country to sign in 2014. Both Malaysia and Singapore have offered to assist Indonesia to tackle the current blazes, but Indonesia has so far declined.
They've got a problem which is bigger than what they can deal with. Neighboring countries offering help, and you say you don't want it. So I think there's a bit of a false sense of national pride here. And I think this is where, it's a situation of all hands on deck. We come together, and that's what ASEAN is all about.
Many see the recurrence of regional haze every few years and the weakness in combating it when it happens as a major failing for ASEAN.
Well, I think the blame game has to stop. People are looking at ASEAN to see if they can solve a major catastrophe that is happening in the region. And if we fail again, then people will not have a sense that we are able to operate as a region that talks about caring and sharing, and as a region that can solve its own problems.
As the fires burn and the air stings the eyes and throats, people in the region will pray for rain to do what their governments have so far failed to do and end the latest haze crisis. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
This is Asia Outlook broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. You can visit our website at miradio.com.mm. You can also listen to our radio programs live on the website. If you're on FM, make sure you catch us on 96.1 FM in Yangon, 96.5 in Mandalay, and 96.7 in Naypyidaw. You can also download MI Radio app on both iOS and Android devices for your own convenience. It has been called one of the world's biggest hidden health crises. Every year, more than 120,000 people die from snake bites, and a further 400,000 people are left with life-changing disabilities. Most of them are from the world's poorest communities in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, where safe, effective treatments are hard to come by. Scientists at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine are hoping to change this by creating a universal snake anti-venom. CGTN spoke to Robert Harrison, head of the Center for Snakebite Research and Intervention, who explained how different poisons, such as those produced by spitting cobras or the infamous black mamba, work to incapacitate their victims.
So let me just put my glasses on.
Yes, I have mine on.
You've got yours on. So we're
I understand there are spitting snakes in this room.
There are spitting cobras, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And here we are. My, look at these.
So Joe, this is an example of a spitting cobra, and it's not that important when it spits in your eye, it spits venom into your eye, if you can just irrigate that away with whatever you've got, water, milk, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And then you should be fine if you can irrigate it well enough.
Right.
It's when they bite that they cause very, very extensive tissue destruction.
Oh.
And that causes the long-term disfigurement and disability. In a continent like sub-Saharan Africa, you have a lot of different snakes. So here we've got the black mamba. This is the sort of Africa's most feared snake because it can cause this paralysis within 20-30 minutes of the bite. And the paralysis is bad enough when it affects the muscles of your eyes. You have this sort of drunken eye look. It's called ptosis. But when it affects the muscles of your breathing, then it stops you breathing. The other major pathology is when the venom gets into your bloodstream. It prevents your blood from repairing injuries. When blood vessels in a normal patient are damaged by whatever source, there are lots of systems in place to cause that clotting around that damage, and that prevents the blood from leaving the blood vessel and into the system. But what the venom proteins do is not only cause damage to the blood vessel, so now it's leaking, so it's now leaking, the blood is leaking out.
Lots of bleeding.
Yes, lots of bleeding, and it stops the repair system, so you continue to bleed copiously. Often what we see in patients is bleeding from the gums, and that's one of the first signs that the person has been bitten by that kind of snake. And a classic example of that in Africa is the source skull viper that we saw.
I see.
And the issue there is that if you can see bleeding from the gums, it's very likely the person is bleeding throughout their body. And when you start bleeding in the brain because of this envenoming, then patients will often die.
The protests in Hong Kong have dealt a serious blow to the city's economy, and it's the retail and tourism sectors that have reportedly been hit the hardest. CGTN's Tang Bo spoke with a clothing store owner about her experience.
Half of my customers are local residents, the rest are tourists, but not a single tourist have visited my store in July and August. Lots of my local customers have taken their kids to overseas summer camps, and they're afraid of coming back because of the protests.
Last Sunday, protesters flooded into the Causeway Bay area after waging petitions at the U.S. consulate. Jessica had to close her store early in the afternoon. The protests have also affected her plans for the future.
I plan to open another store. I have found the site and done negotiating the price with the landlord, but I postponed the plan because of the protests. I thought the unrest won't last long. Now I have to call it a quit, since the protests have been lasting for over 3 months.
Jessica is lucky that her landlord has largely reduced the rent, given the impact of the protests to her business. However, the entire retail and tourism sectors in Hong Kong have tremendously suffered from the current social unrest, which sees no signs of ending. Last year, Hong Kong was one of the world's most visited cities with 30 million tourists. But according to the Hong Kong Financial Secretary, visitors' numbers fell almost 40% from last year. In some areas, hotel occupancy rates in August fell by more than half. The retail and even the catering industry are in a similar situation.
Hong Kong has long been peaceful and prosperous. Those young protesters have been misguided by some foreign forces. They are brainwashed and don't know what they're doing. I'm very upset about it.
Jessica said she's fine with peaceful and legal protests, but she stressed that all rioters must be arrested. She also called on the Hong Kong government to take measures to bring visitors back when things calm down. Tang Bo, CGTN, Hong Kong.
That is the end of our international news. Now we take a look at what is happening around Myanmar with our local news. Vice President U Mien-sui left Yangon on Wednesday for the People's Republic of China to attend the 16th China-ASEAN Expo and the China-ASEAN Business Investment Summit, which will be held from the 24th to the 24th of September in Neining, capital city of South China's Guangxi Zhuan Autonomous Region. That is the end of our local news. And that's all we have for today's Asia Outlook on MI Radio. Thank you for being with us. I'm Melody. We'll be back next week. Until next time.